Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside. But what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
It is episode 24 of the MMA Outsiders. Tom Albano here, along with Zain Bando. And Zain, we've got quite a week when it comes to fight cards. Yeah, I know the news week kind of slow here for this week. However, we've got a card coming up this weekend, Zain, of epic proportions. No, I am not talking about the UFC card that's starting, but the main card is going to start at 1 a.m. Eastern time. No, I'm talking about Bellator 290. I am talking about a card that is the first time a non-UFC promotion, Zain, is going to be on network television since the Strikeforce Nashville Brawl. I am talking about the main event heavyweight championship on the line, Ryan Bader, Fedor Emelianenko, 2 title fights, a prelim card featuring several noteworthy names from Bellator, and it's going to be the final fight in the career of one epic legend, Fedor Emelianenko. So, Zain, what a week. I'm really excited for Bellator. So excited, Zain, that you had the idea and I'm going along with it. We're going to start with our preview. Yeah, we're doing something a little out of the ordinary.
Yeah, this was my idea simply because I feel like it's a way to pay tribute to the last emperor. And I mean, shoot, you go on MMA Twitter this entire week, and it's literally just been full of praise for how good this Bellator card is. People, myself included, saying that Bellator is overtaking the UFC just for this one weekend. So I thought, what the heck? Let's preview this pay-per-view-esque card and give it the respect it deserves, because arguably, Tom, in my opinion, and as you know, I've been to several Bellators, this is the biggest Bellator event, in my opinion, that the promotion has ever had.
This is a major opportunity, Zain. I mean, you think about, like I said, the historical context of this, that for the first time in a very long time, it's going to be
13 years almost.
13 years, yeah, that the last time we saw a non-UFC promotion on network television. Again, non-UFC promotion, so I'm not talking about the UFC's time with Fox, but you think back to that Strikeforce card over in Nashville, another Scott Coker run promotion, where Zain, everything ended with our favorite soundbite of all time.
Sometimes these things happen in MMA. Sometimes these things happen in MMA.
Yeah, one for good measure.
Yeah, and for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a brawl of epic proportions. So to give some backstory context, at the time that this was going on, Strikeforce had been going through a little bit of a stretch where they had signed Fedor in 2009, and they thought it was a brilliant idea to showcase the baddest man on the planet that was not in the UFC on network TV, and it did quite well. So Scott Coker decided, okay, let's bring together Dream and Strikeforce and put together this super mega card. And it was capped off with Dan Henderson versus Jake Shields. Well, that fight was super underwhelming, and Jake Shields was doing his post-fight interview, and Jason Mayhem Miller, along with several other fighters, including the Diaz brothers, he comes up behind Jake Shields and infamously says, "Hey, where's my rematch, buddy?" And the whole thing just totally escalated. And then this has since been wiped from the internet. There's maybe grainy video footage of it, but you could hear Gus Johnson say not the quote that we just played, but before that he goes, "Gentlemen, we're on national television," and then they go to commercial break, and then out of the break he comes back with, "Sometimes these things happen in MMA." And then he goes, the most infamous part is the next thing he says. He goes, "You know, that testosterone in the cage." like,
Uh,
and it's like, oh, brother, we have a long way to go.
yeah. Well, if you've been on MMA Twitter, if you've been on the MMA Twitter sphere this week, you know that there is a long way to go for mixed martial arts. But regardless, I mean, it's sad that what happened with Strikeforce, how that happened, and then you mentioned the trying to showcase Fedor, and then he loses his first round against Brett Rogers, gets the knockout, but the first round doesn't look all that well. It gets submitted in the first round against Fabricio Werdum, and then that's a couple more losses for a 3-fight losing streak, and it just seemed like there was, it posed the questions of, was Fedor really ready, and was Fedor's, was it too late for Fedor, and was Fedor ever going to fight again? And that he actually has come out of retirement once before. He took a little spell within the mid 2010s, and I mean, we've seen some showcases of Fedor Emelianenko in Bellator, and there were times where he's looked great, and then he had the fight with Ryan Bader the first time around in the heavyweight Grand Prix. You know what? I might as well just get the graphic up here. Actually, before we do, Zan, before we get to anything, please make sure you hit that like button, make sure you hit subscribe, and ring the notification bell. That way you get notified of everything here on the Empty the Bench Network, including every episode of MMA Outsiders whenever we go live. Make sure to follow us across social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram over at MMA Outsiders, ETB. And make sure to give the network a follow too at ETB Network on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. At Sam Bando, you can find his work over at Zambando99 on Twitter, and you can find his work over at bjpen.com. On Talbano, you can find my work over at Fansided at Thomas J. Albano at Tom Talk Sports 9 on Twitter. All right. Now that's out of the way, Zan. Let's talk about Fedor Emelianenko. Do you want to do the fight first, or do you think we should talk about Fedor himself first?
Let's go into a career retrospective first, but before we get into any of that, I just have to toot my own horn a little bit. I've been lucky enough to see the man himself fight twice in person. I went to his fight with Dan Henderson, where he was awkwardly knocked out, and it was probably one of the weirdest sequences of an ending of a fight I've ever seen in person or on television. And I was more than lucky enough to watch him knock out Frank Mir. So those are my two fond memories of going to Fedor Emelianenko fights in person. And I've gotten a chance to meet the man himself. And anyway, he's very cold, and he doesn't say much. And you knew that this time was going to come. And of course, because Scott Coker is the man who he is, and he has the relationship with Fedor that he does, it is no surprise to me, nor should it be a surprise to any of the MMA hardcores, yourself included, that Fedor is getting a title shot, because it's just the way that it was meant to be, right?
For sure. So you look at Fedor's career, Zan. I mean, beginning in 2000, he primarily competed in the Rings promotion. It was in the Rings promotion, actually, where he had his one and only loss prior to the Verdun fight. And it was actually in very controversial circumstances. He was competing in the King of Kings 2000 tournament, and he was hit with an elbow, which in that Rings tournament was actually illegal, but the referee missed it and ended up stopping the fight not in Fedor's favor, for a loss for him because of the cut that had developed around his eye.
Yeah. Yes, that is very much correct. And there's also the one part you didn't mention, because it's not in this category. Isn't it also correct that he did have one no contest in his career as well? It was the first fight against Minotauro Nogueira, right?
Yes, Pride Final Conflict 2004 faced Rodrigo Nogueira. That was a heavyweight championship fight, and it was heavyweight Grand Prix final, which is kind of funny, Zan, because that was in Pride where Fedor made his name, and obviously Fedor wasn't in the light heavyweight Grand Prix, but we just had a situation in Bellator where you were at, Zan, where we needed a rematch for the light heavyweight Grand Prix because of a no contest. kind of funny how they lost in historical context that it's happened twice within a 20-year span.
Yeah, that is weird to think about. So you have to keep something else in perspective. So I started watching MMA in 2006, and I didn't know what Pride was until long after it had dissolved. So I didn't know who Fedor was until the whole UFC contract saga started, and he didn't sign with. And that's when I first heard about who he was. And I have to say, probably his first fight that I remember watching is his fight with Kevin Randleman. And do you remember your first memory of watching Fedor fight?
So my first memory, so I remember because I had DirecTV at the time. I remember seeing all the Pride Fighting Championship commercials, but I never watched any of them. Not because I wasn't a fan, but it's just I didn't understand MMA. I didn't get into MMA until like I mentioned last week's and first season of The Ultimate Fighter, and primarily it was just UFC. So it was around the contract saga, and it was around the contract saga where I had first heard with Fedor and watched him, and it was um actually, Zan, we've talked very recently about the whole Randy Couture situation where he was trying to fight Fedor. And he even had that tease where they were doing a promo, Fedor and Randy, for the EA Sports MMA video game. No, not the UFC video game. I'm talking about late 2000s where EA Sports, I think it was '09 or 10, where EA Sports decided to do their own MMA game. And they had Randy Couture and Fedor Emelianenko on the cover, and they had the shot, Zan, of one of the promo videos where they showed it to the crowd of them basically doing a face-off, teasing that one day those two could actually compete. That was actually a whole dispute in the late 2000s for Randy Couture, and then Brock Lesnar. They had all this talk about maybe Fedor could fight Brock Lesnar, as you mentioned, the whole contract saga that just went awry. So, unfortunately, by the time, Zan, I was watching Fedor was, as I mentioned, was about Strikeforce, and it was kind of that when he went on the 3-fight losing streak, and we were concerned that this might have been the decline and might have been it for Fedor. Little
So
did we
you
know.
don't. So you don't. So just to clarify, did you watch the Brett Rogers fight or did you not watch it?
Did I watch it when it happened live? No.
Okay.
Afterwards, yeah.
Okay. Um, I was gonna say, also, you were probably wondering, oh, Stan, were you there? Because that was also in Illinois. Unfortunately, I was not. I was dragged to a fourth grade play that night, and I wish I had. Um, I wish I had gone because I knew because I obviously knew who Fedor was at the time, but thankfully I got to see him fight in person twice. But it would have been 3 times if I wasn't dragged to a play.
So,
So,
Sam, do you remember the play that you were dragged to?
yeah, I actually do. It was Oh, I know this too. Oh, what was it? Did I? Oh, it was it was based on it might have been like a Polar Express like remake or I mean it might have been something based on a movie that they decided to turn into a play, and it was sort of like a school talent show or something like that. So that's where I was.
November 2009, so that would have been around the holiday season. So kind of actually makes sense where
Yeah.
where we got Fedor basically being dropped by Brett Rogers and having to come back with a knockout in the second round. Meanwhile, here you are with some little kid probably doing a horrible Josh Groban impersonation. If
No,
you
I was
just
I was I
believe.
was I was an audience. I was an audience member. I didn't even participate. I didn't even participate in the play.
Regardless, if you just believe. Meanwhile, Brett Rogers is getting knocked out.
And then of course back then I wasn't old enough to have a phone, right? So of course, by the way, another weird fun fact: I first discovered Twitter in 2009 on a BlackBerry because Dana White used to interact with the fans all the time, and once I saw his since deleted tweet of like dot 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 or oh no something related to the Fedor fight. I'm like, oh, there it is. He probably won because Dana's upset. But yeah, I have fond memories of 2009, 2010 Twitter and Dana White having no idea how to use it. So
Then
yeah,
even in 2023, there are people who don't know how to use it.
yeah. So that is my first memory of Fedor Emelianenko, is hearing about the Brett Rogers fight after the fact because I wasn't there. And so that's how that's what I can recall. And by the way, meeting him in person is very intimidating because he doesn't say much. So
He doesn't look like he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would say much. He
no,
would be a very quiet individual.
no, he does not. I have to ask you this question though: do you think the Fabio Maldonado fight was controversial in your opinion?
I'd have to say so. I mean, I'm trying to look. So, is that fight still listed? Yeah, it seems like it's mixed results. That some places are listing it as a draw, and some places still list it as a Fedor win. I just find it very funny, Stan, that the fight was sanctioned and oversaw with judges by those from the Russian MMA union. In the words of in the words of oh my god, who is it? What's the name of the video I would always watch? I gotta find it. But somebody, there was this person who I would always watch their video. Oh, the Montage King. He said that it was overseen by the Russian MMA union or federation.
Oh my!
Which Fedor is the president now, by the way.
You just brought back some really old memories because they only make like one video every 2 years.
That's why I lost track of who they were. I'm like, oh my god, who was it?
Yeah, that's some like OG YouTube MMA content right there.
Some of their videos still hold up.
But yeah, I mean, I thought, because I watched the fight live on Fight Pass in Florida, and I thought in real time that Maldonado had won. I thought he won.
Yeah. I mean, it was a fight that maybe had Fedor done Fedor things, it could have maybe given him, one or two fights with the UFC, but it seemed like Maldonado had won that fight. But
my argument is that no matter if he would have won or lost, I don't think he was getting signed to the UFC no matter what. That's
you think it was just to get him on Fight Pass for that one time?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, a nice way to get Fight Pass some business exposure.
True, very true. Good point.
So, but then obviously comes the Bellator run, and Zain. I mean, let's look at Bellator, his history with Bellator thus far. I mean, having that very weird fight with Matt Mitrione on the Bellator NYC card, where we got the double knockdown, and then he loses that fight, comes back about 10 months later, beats Mir in the first round of the heavyweight Grand Prix. A few months later, out in Long Island, beats Chael Sonnen in a round. And then the fight with Ryan Bader, the Grand Prix final, where he loses with one punch in 35 seconds. Then fighting Quinton Rampage Jackson in Japan, a little tribute to Pride in the main event of Bellator 237. Ends up getting a first round finish there. Then, mostly in part because of the pandemic, we don't see him for nearly 2 years, where he fights Timothy Johnson. Timothy Johnson comes out to real American and tries to make the most of the situation, and he just gets flatlined. So, Zain, how would you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate Fedor's run with Bellator? Now, granted, it's not over until this Saturday. Does this Saturday maybe, do you rate it one way if he wins and rate it one way if he loses, or is there just an overall ranking in your head?
Good question. I'd have to give it about a 6, but it goes up for me if he beats Bader, and it goes up even more if he finishes him, in my opinion. I just don't think his Bellator run is all that impressive. So
I agree. I actually agree, Zain. I mean, it looked bad when when he lost to Mitrione. I'm thinking, Zain. I remember watching that live, Zain, and I'm thinking, oh no, it's Strikeforce all over again. I said, this is going to end in absolute disaster. Then they book him against Mir for the heavyweight Grand Prix. I said, okay, maybe they're going to give him the one fight. But then he beat Mir, he beat Chael, and then the Ryan Bader fights. I mean, that was disappointing. Uh, and having him fight Rampage Jackson and Timothy Johnson in the states that they're in. I mean, Zan, Rampage Jackson in 2019, almost the start of 2020, Zan, is not the Rampage Jackson of 15 years earlier. That fight was done. That's one of those fights where it's like, okay, cool, but this is not prime Rampage, and this is not prime Fedor, which I think would have been a really interesting fight to have actually happened if they were both in their primes. And Timothy Johnson, I mean, obviously Timothy Johnson Zan is one of the top heavyweights in Bellator, but he's not the legendary figure that Fedor is. So, I mean, you got this fight with Bader, and I think this will be an interesting closeout to his chapter of Bellator. Because he can either go out held up high being the heavyweight champion and retire in the cage with the championship, or Zan, he's gonna end up, if he loses, that's gonna put him at a 4-3 record in Bellator, which is not that all impressive, like you mentioned.
No, and then I think people, if he loses, people are going to be critical, like, oh, how does a 4-2, a 4-2 Bellator fighter get a heavyweight title shot, whereas all of these other fighters could arguably be more deserving. And for those quote unquote haters out there, I have one thing to say: the man went 31-1 in a 10-year period. I think that warrants him getting one more shot at a championship alone. Granted, the guys that he beat from about 2000 to 2005 were great, and you could probably argue that 2006 onward probably was the last of the great competition, at least the competition that were in their prime. When he won, absolutely.
I mean, Zan, I'm just gonna rat off some names here from his Pride run: Sammy Schilt, Keith Haring, Rodrigo Nogueira, Gary Goodridge, Mark Coleman, Kevin Randleman, Mirko Krokop, Mark Hunt. He fought Tim Sylvia and Andrei Arlovsky in Affliction, but I mean those two kind of were at down periods. For the professional wrestling fans out there, he even fought Yuji Nagata in an MMA rules bout at Antonio Inoki's Bumaye pay-per-view in 2003, which he ended up flatlining Nagata in like a minute. But like you mentioned, Zan, he's fought all these interesting people. He's fought Pedro Rizzo in 2012 before his first retirement, fought Satoshi Ishii. As much as he had the 3 losses in Strikeforce, Zan, Fabricio Werdum, Bigfoot Silva, Dan Henderson, noteworthy names, he has fought a whole bunch. And there's still more bunch, Zan, that, you look at Randy Couture, Brock Lesnar, you think, what if? Because there's still more possibilities of Fedor fighting even more people in their prime. So, I mean, as far as him getting a championship fight, I mean, originally I was a little hesitant about him getting a heavyweight championship match, but at the end of the day, it is Fedor Emelianenko. It is one of, if not the GOATs of mixed martial arts. Obviously, you're going to want to work with him to paint the best kind of ending possible. And if that means a heavyweight championship match, that means a heavyweight championship match. Plus, I mean, you look at the heavyweight ranks, and I mean, you think about what Bellator has at heavyweight. I mean, Moldavsky was the interim champion, but lost to Bader. Tim Johnson fought for the interim title, lost by Fedor Emelianenko. Fedor's last fight, lost. Are we really going to give Czech Congo another heavyweight championship fight?
No, I mean, no offense to Czech Congo, but he's been way past his prime for years. And if that happens, and no offense to the heavyweight division either, I just think there's a lot of unwatchable fights in the division that I'm sorry to say it's sort of a dig, but I do think Bellator always talks about, we have the better division. I think even though the
Absolutely not.
UFC's heavyweight division gets crapped on all the time, it makes the UFC's heavyweight division look unbelievable, in my opinion.
Granted, the heavyweight division in the UFC certainly suffers after Francis Ngannou has left. But now that the UFC, even if it's only for the short term, Zan is adding John Jones, again one of the goats of this sport, whether you like him or not, to its heavyweight division. That just hurts the distance between the two. And maybe you can point to Linton Vassell going to heavyweight and says he might be interesting. Steve Murray is 10-0. The rise of Daniel James, and I know they're still trying to build Tyrell Fortune, but Zan, as you kind of imply, none of those names compared to Fedor Emelianenko. None of those names compared to Ryan Bader. So it really seems like the logical choice, Zan, is to have this rematch here. That starts off. That is the main event of Bellator 290, especially Zan, when you're talking about a card that is going to air on CBS, and we just talked about Zan. We spent a little time on it. The absolute historic context with this card and the big opportunity that is presented for Bellator by being on network television. Give me a second here to pull this up. Okay, so the opportunities, Zan, that the Bellator has. You're gonna want a stacked kind of card, and Zan. It's only 3 fights, but they chose a damn good 3 fights. And then you've got names like Neiman Gracie, Lorenz Larkin, Henry Corrales, Grant Neal, Darren Caldwell, a former champion, competing on the preliminary card. For that to be topped off, Zan, you need to have a big main event to go with those prelims. You need the 2 title fights. And Zan, Ryan Bader versus Fedor Emelianenko 2 is that fight.
Yeah, it is that fight, and you have to give Bellator a ton of credit because they've never been on CBS. The last time Viacom did something with MMA was with Scott Coker, so it's obvious that he's been able to maintain those relationships, and that Fedor is a big draw on CBS, and it makes a lot of sense. And you know what? If this was 10 years ago, you could argue that this fight could have very well taken place in the UFC, but here we are now, and I think it goes to show that if Ryan Bader wins, he's a legitimate threat at heavyweight that's outside the UFC. And if Fedor wins, I think it creates a lot of parity in that division, even though it is his retirement fight. Bellator is going to have a lot of question marks. I think they're more concerned of whether they're going to go after this fight if Fedor wins. I just think stylistically it's a great fight, and I think it goes a lot differently than the first one, and I just think Fedor got caught. That's what I think.
So Zan, let me put you on the spot a little bit before we do predictions. Let me put you on the spot. So let's say Fedor Emelianenko wins this fight. What does Bellator do then at heavyweight? Who would you put in what would be a vacant championship fight?
Bader versus Moldavsky, in my opinion.
You would run that fight back?
I would, yeah.
You would not give a title shot to Linton Vassell or anybody?
Not at the moment. I think that Vassell needs to win one more fight to prove to me that he's ready for it.
Do you think maybe depending on the timing of his next fight and the timing of what they want to do with the heavyweight championship, and what would be a vacant heavyweight championship, that Bellator might keep its eye on trying to strap a rocket to Mori?
It's a possibility. But would you be interested in doing Mori in an interim title fight? Because I'd be down for that.
I'd be down of keeping him 1 or 2 more fights, whether it be an interim title fight or just a number 1 contenders fight. So, but I guess, San, if you're pointing out that, there's a real possibility that Bader and Moldavsky 2 could be a vacant title fight after this. I think, Zan, that just goes to further prove how much more depth is needed at heavyweight for Bellator.
It's a good point. Okay, so if Ryan Bader wins, what do you think Bellator does?
If Bader wins, then I think you need to look at the possibility of some fresh matchups. I don't know if you do Moldavsky too again. I think you see what happens next with Linton Vassell, and if he wins, then maybe you run Ryan Bader versus Linton Vassell. Uh, I think Steve Maury is going to be an interesting one. That if Maury can end up getting a win or two before Bader gets back in the cage, maybe he's next in line, or maybe he's in line after a Vassell fight if Bader goes through Vassell. I mean, and do you see the possibility that Bader might try to move down to light heavyweight again?
I mean, is that really what Bellator wants to do to keep the future of the division moving?
I mean, is that what Bellator wants? I mean, that's a possibility, but I don't know if Bader goes down to light heavyweight and then we try and run. I don't know if we want to try him versus Vadim Nemkov 3. I just don't think that's realistic.
I mean, who do you think would win that fight if it were to happen?
A rematch between Nemkov and Bader. I would say Nemkov. I think Nemkov really proved in that first fight. He's got something on Bader, and I think maybe Bader needs to focus more on heavyweight, where he really is the best of the best. Even though, like I just mentioned, there is a lack of competition there for Bader. I mean, you're gonna have meanwhile at light heavyweight, you got Nemkov and Yoel Romero and Phil Davis. There are more possibilities you can do with Nemkov than a rematch with Ryan Bader.
With that being said, could you see Vadim Nemkov move up to heavyweight if Bader were to win on Saturday?
Zan, I now that you say that out loud, I think that is a real possibility and something that maybe Bellator officials might want to consider or hope for. That maybe there is the chance that he moves up, and then maybe that would actually make the rematch a little more interesting if it was for Bader's title and not Nemkov's title, and give Nemkov the chance to be the double champ.
If you were matchmaking right now, what would you do given this whole fiasco?
Well, obviously, we can't decide on anything until this fight actually happens. Uh, I mean, if Fedor wins, then Zan, like you mentioned, I mean, maybe there's no choice but to do Bader versus Moldavsky. But I think, Zan, now that we're saying these things out loud, I think, Zan, at this point, maybe if you're Bellator, you might want to be on the phone with Nemkov and say, hey, maybe there's the possibility, after your next fight, maybe the possibility of moving up to heavyweight.
What's interesting to me too is that I just don't think I think people are so focused on Fedor coming back that I don't think people realize that Ryan Bader is up 1-0 in this series. Does it feel the same way in your opinion too?
I agree that Bader is up 1-0 in this series, and like I mentioned, he has proven success at heavyweight. I would say more at heavyweight than he has at light heavyweight. I think light heavy, like we said, is more of Nemkov's throne now, which is coincidentally Nemkov being a protege of Fedor's. So you look at this possibility, Zan, and Zan. Actually, there's one other thing we're forgetting. One other thing we're forgetting, Zan, when we're talking about Vadim Nemkov and maybe his role in this, and what Bellator officials might want and what he might want, possibility of Bader moving back down or him going up. His fight with Yoel Romero got scrapped. What if Bellator wants to run Vadim Nemkov versus Yoel Romero for the light heavyweight championship again?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think there are a lot of directions you could go with both divisions. I do think it is contingent on who wins this fight, but I think what Bellator is probably hoping for is Bader versus Moldavsky because they could promote that fight and build it up in a way that maybe their other encounter didn't previously.
But if that's the case, Sam, if that is the case, do you think then Bellator officials, as much as they're talking about Fedor and it's Fedor's retirement fight and the sentiment is going to be with Fedor, would do you think Bellator officials would then be hoping that Bader wins this one?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think it's one of those things where you have to wait and see how it plays out. It's obvious that the attention's on Fedor, but the division's going to have to move on either way. So I think it's more so what Bellator wants to do instead of really more or so what the fans think. Because ultimately, it's gonna be up to Bellator, and they're gonna be the ones to make the decisions, and that's just all part of it. So, I mean, we'll see, but I do think it impacts two divisions, heavyweight and light heavyweight, more than people realize.
And again, you're talking about one division then at heavyweight, which is kind of weak for Bellator, and then another division, light heavyweight, which I mean, even if you're not the biggest fan of light heavyweight with Bellator compared to the UFC, I still think Bellator is head shoulders above. So you look at this picture, Zan, and you look at this fight. Let's narrow in on this fight. So before we try to pick any more potential puzzle pieces up, what does happen on Saturday? Because I think you and I are in the same boat that this one is not going to last 30 seconds like the last one did. But how long will this fight last? And does Fedor win again, or does Fedor go out with the heavyweight championship?
Um, per- Personally, I think that Fedor Emelianenko wins this fight. I mean, I think it's too much at stake, too much on the line. CBS the whole thing to see Fedor go out like that. I think Fedor is going to win this fight, and I think he's going to win it late. I think he's going to win it in third or fourth round.
Interesting. I think Zan Bader is just at such a role at heavyweight, and Fedor hasn't had the greatest run at with Bellator that I feel like he's not going. It's not going to last 30 seconds, but I could see late first, at some point in the second, Bader getting another knockout, and Bader going out. I mean, coming out still the champion at the end of the At the end of the picture. Uh, is that what CBS wants? I don't know. As far as Bellator goes, I mean, like we just talked about, it's an interesting thought to compare. I mean, seeing how this does affect two divisions, to take your words. Um, so if Bader wins, I mean, it will be interesting to see what they want to do with Nemkov, what Nemkov himself wants to do, who else they see as the potential challenger. And then I guess then I'm in one of those heart versus brain things where it's like my heart wants to be with Fedor. I think it would be fantastic to see him hold up a heavyweight championship in his last fight, but my fight analyst brain wants to go with Bader.
Interesting. Could you see this going the distance? Because I don't think it will.
Absolutely not. These two, absolutely not.
Interesting. And do you think at any point in the fight's going to be razor close or tied up at any point?
If this fight were to somehow go to a third round down, I could see it going into that third round being 1-1.
Interesting. And are we going to see any surprises?
I think maybe. I think Fedor might. Like, I think we could have a situation, Zan, where within the same round, each one rocks the other. If you get what I mean, like the round might open with Fedor rocking Bader, and then a couple minutes later, Bader rocks Fedor, or vice versa. I think that would be fun to. I think that would be fun to see.
Interesting. And my final question for you is, do you think in any way there's going to be any controversy in this fight at all?
Let's hope not. I want to say no. Let's hope not. I'm going to be hopeful. I know maybe it's wrong of me to be hopeful in MMA, but let's be hopeful.
Good point. But yeah, I think we're split on this. So I have Fedor and you have Ryan Bader winning the rematch.
Hmm. Let's see how we both feel about the co-main event, though. This card, while it revolves a lot around Fedor Emelianenko, we still got plenty of more action for Bellator. It's a huge card. Co-main event, Johnny Eblen, the human cheat code, makes his first defense of the Bellator Middleweight Championship, taking on Anatoly Tokov. Zan, what's your read on this fight?
Yeah, I think Eblin is set up to have a big 2023. Um, Tokov is obviously riding an impressive win streak. He's beat a lot of good guys, but I mean, I just think Eblin's wrestling is going to make the difference, and I think he's going to win this fight and this title successfully. He may overcome a bit of adversity. He may be down 1 or 2 rounds in the fight, but overall, I do think that Eblin comes out on top. What do you think?
I am in the same boat with you on this one. I think Eblin's got a lot of momentum to him. I know we just mentioned Tokov on a big winning streak, but Eblin's on a winning streak on his own, hasn't tasted defeat. I think Bellator is looking at Eblin as a potential future star. I know middleweight, and I know middleweight not exactly talent filled. I know that Eblin, when you compare him to a Bader or to a Fedor or to any other stars that maybe Bellator has, doesn't have the star value. But I think, as you mentioned, Zan, that there's a chance Evelyn could have a very big 2023. And I think Bellator is banking on that to the point where they're putting him on the undercard, the co-main event of a Fedor card, of Fedor Bader 2, in order to give him, a little bit of a push.
Good point. That makes sense. What I was also going to say too is I don't expect this fight to go to the judges either.
What do you see Evelyn doing as a finish?
I think Eblin wins in the second round by sub.
I could buy that. Second, third round submission.
Yeah. By the way, I'm surprised this fight's not a pick'em because it should be closer betting wise, in my opinion.
Yeah. I agree on that one. The opening fight for the main card, we're gonna start with a non-title fight over at welterweight. We've got Sabah Hamasi taking on Brennan Ward.
Yeah, I mean Hamasi is a character, is he not? And then Brennan Ward just comes to fight. If this isn't a firefight, I'm going to be very surprised. I have Ward by finish in the second round. What do you think?
I think this one, I agree, Zan. I would be disappointed if it's not a firefight. I think this one goes the distance somehow. However, Zan, I do agree with you that I'm going to go with Brennan Ward.
Good point. And also, I just see this fight being super entertaining. And for people who have never watched Bellator before, and you want to see some action before the bigger names take center stage, that's a great fight to kick off the main card. But this football preliminary card, you could argue some of these fights are good enough for a main card positioning as well, especially with Neiman Gracie and Dante Shiro. Um, and he's one. Having a Gracie on this card is just as sentimental in itself.
But absolutely, you're talking about MMA history, one of the families of MMA, man. And then you got Lorenz Larkin, who is a UFC veteran. I like Lorenz on this card. You got Henry Corrales. Hey, Dad, look, there's Steve Murray. Ali Azayev, undefeated versus undefeated at heavyweight.
Yeah, that's interesting too. And then um, Max Rushpokov is gonna give it a go again.
Against
His
Chris Gonzalez. I like
his
that
lone
fight.
his lone UFC fight didn't go well, so it'll be interesting to see how he does. Because he's still very green in the sport. Would you not agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think this fight with Chris Gonzalez is an opportunity for him to. It's a redemption fight.
I mean, shoot, this card's so loaded that Darion Caldwell was the fourth fight of the night. That's how.
How is
That's
the
how.
former Bellator bantamweight champion the fourth fight of the night?
It's bizarre.
It is bizarre. We're not going to go too in depth onto the UFC Vegas card, so let's just do best bets for Bellator 290. Then, what do you see as a good bet to select?
Hasmani Ward not to go the distance. Eblin by finish, and Fedor versus Bader over 3.5 rounds.
I would say some of the best bets. I think Fedor Fedor does not go the distance. I go Eblin money line. I'm kind of tempted, Zan, to put some money on Steve Murray. I feel like with his positioning, I know he's fighting Ali Azayev, but I feel like with his positioning, he's got a lot going for him. That I think that's a win. He'll be motivated enough to get the big win on this card.
Interesting. Is there one fight on this card that you're not looking forward to watching?
I mean, not really. Not really. I mean, you've got you've got plenty of talent on this card, and I mean, obviously, you've got a couple of 2-1s and a 1-0 and a 3-0 on the preliminary card, but I think that helps Bellator a little to just have a couple of these young guys, that are just starting out in the sport as your first couple of fights. I think that presents a big opportunity for those guys as well.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. But yeah, this card gets a 9.2 from me out of 10. This is a good card.
There's a lot of hype around this card, and I'm excited for it. We do have UFC Vegas 68. I'm not even gonna bother with the screen because it's one fight. It's Derrick Lewis versus Sergey Spivak. Zan, are you gonna stay up and watch this fight?
No, but I might set an alarm to watch the main event though.
I might do the same, although I don't know. I don't know. I might just watch it next day. I don't know if I want to wait till 4 in the morning here on the East Coast to watch that fight.
Are you or are you not planning on covering this fight?
I am not going to. I'm just going to cover Bellator.
Okay, that's a smart decision. I think probably many other MMA media members feel the same. Okay,
I do have a job on Monday mornings, and I can't screw up my sleep schedule that way.
do you think anybody outside of the people working the event for the UFC are going to be at the Apex? That's a big question.
I think there might be a couple of diehards.
That's a big question. I'm taking the Apex King and Derrick Lewis. I think he knocks Jorge Spivak out within the first 3 minutes and makes it look super easy. What do you think?
I think, Zan, I'm going to agree with you on Derrick Lewis getting a knockout, and I'll go one step further. I think he has to get a knockout victory here. Yeah, I mean, this is the UFC Apex, as you mentioned. He has got a pretty good record with the UFC Apex. Spivak has won 5 of his last 6. Meanwhile, Lewis has lost 3 of his last 4. Hasn't exactly looked impressive in his most recent fights. I feel like, Zan, for Derrick Lewis to get some momentum back, he needs a knockout victory here, first or second round.
So you think he needs a first or second round knockout to tell the UFC something?
Yep.
And do you think also he needs a first or second round knockout to be on the heels of Blades or Pavlovich? Probably.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if he wins by decision, that's not going to be enough.
Interesting. And what is Spivak's best chance to victory in your opinion, if he has any sort of chance?
I mean, I'm fairly confident that he should be able to get the victory. I think he's just gotta tire Lewis out or just wait for an opening for Lewis to give.
Interesting. And I'm kind of curious as well. I mean, do you think the easiest prop for this fight is this fight to go under 3.5? Because that would be my safest bet.
That would be my safest bet. And if you don't want to go that, you can alternately does not go the distance, but I don't know how much value that one's gonna have.
True. And I'm also curious, is this going to be a card that we regret staying up for because the fights are going to be awesome, or do you think we're going to be happy that we swept through it?
Well, Zan, knowing the UFC luck, where cards that don't have all the hype somehow end up being awesome, I'll probably regret this one.
Yeah, I probably will too. I just hope and pray the UFC never does a 10 p.m. A 10 p.m. start in Vegas for a UFC fight night Apex card where the prelims start at 10 p.m. and not the main card. So
Yeah, I agree on that one. Sam, before we go, just a couple of different little news stories that we can talk about. Alex Pereira, Israel Adesanya 2 is now confirmed, as is a welterweight showdown, Sam, between Gilbert Burns and George Masvidal. That both those fights are going to take place at UFC 287 on April 8th. Reports are circulating, rumors that it's going to be in Miami. Dana, as you mentioned on Instagram, somebody asked him about Miami, and he teased with a little fist bump emoji. So maybe, just maybe, it might be in the Masvidal, in Masvidal territory, this card. Dana had teased an announcement last weekend, and it just ended up being a promo, which was just a promo for pay-per-views with fights that we already knew, except for this one. This was the big new one. Zan, what are your thoughts on UFC 287 and the two major fights that it's got going for it so far?
well, we've talked about this for a month where, we have these 4 cards coming up and you're going to ask consumers to pay $80 a card to watch all of these cards in Q1. If you were to ask me which card to buy, this is the one I would buy. It's based on these 2 fights alone.
I mean, Zan, I was going to say, now you have 3 weeks after Leon Kamaru 3, you've got this. Plus, Zan, there's now going to be the slap fighting finals, how they wanted it on pay-per-view. They're going to do it the weekends between 285 and 286.
Because of course they are.
Dana White is asking for a lot from his consumers.
By the way, I think it's amazing that slap fighting is on pay-per-view for the finale. But what I think is even more amazing is I'm curious if my old rant of pay-per-view going to TV, is it going to be on TV or is it going to be on some sort of streaming platform that we've never heard of? That's another question.
Imagine it's on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. The Dana actually talks ESPN into doing it.
I don't know. What do you think?
Well, Sam, actually, let me throw in one more question. Let me throw in a question. Do you think the slap fighting pay-per-view is going to get more buys than PFL's pay-per-view?
Probably.
Or PFL.
Probably, because the promotion is just going to be way different. It's probably the case.
If that's the case, then I want a card jiu-jitsu championships pay-per-view next year.
Okay. By the way, I think I'd be more interested in watching a card jitsu fight on pay-per-view than a slap fighting event on pay-per-view.
Probably.
But yeah, I actually like both of these fights. Early prediction: Adesanya gets his belt back, and Gilbert Burns finish his Jorge Masvidal in 9 minutes.
In 9 minutes. Ooh, you're going to the minutes.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, I know they're putting this pay-per-view, it seems like, in Masvidal territory, but I mean, Sen, Masvidal just has not looked the same since his soar in 2019, losing to Kamaru twice, getting dominated by Colby Covington. I could see Gilbert Burns kind of having a field day with him. Either a late finish or a unanimous decision. But if it's a unanimous decision, San, it's going to be like 30-27s, 30-26s. I don't. Masvidal needs to show something in this fight because his trajectory is not good at this point. Give me Gilbert Burns all the way. As far as the rematch between Alex Pereira and Israel Adesanya 2 goes. So, San, did Izzy win you over by being up 3 rounds to 1, or did Pereira win you over because of the late finish that he got?
No, Pereira won me over because of the late finish he got.
Yes, you're on my side, finally.
Which, by the way, I do think, though, that he did get a little bit Okay, if we're being honest, I have a conspiracy theory that he listened to our show a few days beforehand, noticed that you picked him and I picked against him, and he said, "Okay, I'm gonna turn it up a little bit."
You called me crazy, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna go Pereira in the rematch as well.
Okay.
I think this is a solid 1-2. I think this is a solid 1-2. I want to see how that rest of that card plays out.
Very good point. And of course, before we move on to Conor McGregor, I'm getting a little bit excited because maybe, just maybe, we'll get UFC 288 or 289 in my.
Oh, that's right. You had another interaction with Dana, and he gave you the fist bumps as well when you asked about Chicago.
Yeah.
So maybe the May pay-per-view, the June pay-per-view, or maybe a summer fight night in Chicago. I'm all for it.
What else? What else do you want? So my next question, since we're joking around, is what else? What else do you want me? What else do you want me to ask him about?
Well, you know what? You could ask him about Conor McGregor and tough.
Yeah, if it's really happening or not. But yeah, so
fist bump twice if yes, fist bump 4 times if no.
No, good point. Okay, so for those of you guys who don't know, Severe MMA, it's an Irish MMA outlet. They're reporting that Conor McGregor is set to make his UFC return, and part of that return is to coach the next season of The Ultimate Fighter versus a unnamed opponent. He's been targeted to maybe coach against Tony Ferguson or Justin Gaethje. Tom, do you care at all about this? Is this going to make you watch The Ultimate Fighter again? If this is true, how do you feel about it?
Maybe for an episode or two.
Okay.
Maybe an episode. We talked about last week how Tough seems to have lost kind of its luster, and maybe they're trying to bring Conor back as a way to help the show and also get Conor, as we talked about, his first fight in the Octagon in what would be about 2 years. But I mean, you look at the potential coaches, opponents, and the coaches fights that would happen afterwards. I mean, Conor McGregor versus Justin Gaethje doesn't excite me as much as it did a couple of years ago, where I think Gaethje will probably have a solid showing against McGregor and possibly finish him in 2 rounds, if not 1. Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, kind of in the same boat. Probably 2nd round finish for Chandler. Conor McGregor versus Tony Ferguson. I'm sorry, Zan. If they do Conor McGregor versus Tony Ferguson, that's 5 or 6 years too late.
Yeah, I think so, and it sets up for an easy win, in my opinion.
Yeah,
For Conor McGregor.
And then Zan, watch what happens afterwards. Then that means Conor McGregor is going to get a title shot against the winner of Islam and Volkanovski.
Oh, of course, because that's the most UFC thing ever.
Insert here the soundbite of Dana going, "The Notorious!" at the press conference with
Yeah. But he goes, but you forgot to do his impersonation where he goes, "The reigning, defending," he's screaming into the microphone, and then all the memes get made of him turning super red. By the way, that's one of the craziest press tours I've ever seen in all of sports. Fighting or not, that was just 4 days of just straight chaos. Absolute chaos. By the way, my favorite press conference was London. How about yours?
I mean, it all felt the same after the first one.
Did you go to the one in Brooklyn or no?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't go to any of them. Trying to think.
I wasn't at any of them either, if it makes you feel any better.
I think I don't know. I don't remember which one it was, but I remember one of my favorite lines from it was Floyd was throwing the money around, and Conor quipped at him, "That's for the tax man," because a report had just come out that Floyd hadn't paid his taxes.
Yeah, and then he goes, "What? That's it? There's about $5,000 in there." That's what he. Yeah.
Conor also was in the news. So the day, hours after we talk about his assault accusations, and we see this footage of Conor McGregor getting involved in some sort of accident. He got hit by a car while he was on a bike.
Yeah. If it isn't another weird day with the Conor McGregor story, that doesn't make any sense, right?
It's not a day in MMA if we don't have a weird Conor McGregor story somewhere in the world.
That's true.
Zen, speaking of trying to circle back to the special announcement letdown kind of thing. So, Logan Paul, you were very let down when instead of Fight News, we got that it's going to be an official partnership between the UFC and Prime Drink, which Zan is going to include the renaming of the red and blue corners.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw my reply to that. But I said RIP end of an era, mid '90s to February of 2023, and it just went absolutely crazy.
So Zan, fighters can't have sponsors on them, but we can rename the red and blue corners. What's next? Is Bruce Buffer's next suit gonna have sponsors draped all over it?
Knowing Bruce Buffer, it's probably a possibility. But I just have another question. How is this even remotely news? But like I don't know if you've seen that debate, but
It's not. It's not. I think Zan. I'm just commenting on it for the sheer stupidity of renaming the red and blue corners. What are they going to call the red and blue corners again?
And now fighting out of the hydration zone.
the red prime hydration zone, and the blue.
It's so stupid. Now we have to include a Bruce Buffer soundbite of him saying that for the very first time and just play it over and over and over again when we think that there's a news take that's just horrible. It's a good idea, isn't it?
No, you know what we need, Zan? Have you ever seen the cameo that Bruce Buffer made of one person telling their lover basically it's like a breakup message telling them to move on, and we need that for a story that we briefly mentioned. We're just like, yeah, we don't want to talk about this. We're just gonna
No, that's true. By the way, your impersonation is pretty good because that's exactly how he does it.
I got him down to a T. It's funny. I don't have his voice though. I won't have the voice for it.
No, of course. But yeah, I guess that's going to be a weird development. And then of course, the big boxing news. It's starting to ramp up again. Tank Davis, Ryan Garcia, are we any closer to seeing it happening? We have no idea. But what we do know is there are possible locations being targeted. So earlier today, Michael Benson tweeted this out courtesy of the Boxing Scene as well, that Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia could be taking place in Las Vegas at either Allegiant Stadium, MGM Grand, or the T-Mobile Arena. Tom, assuming that it does take place in Las Vegas, I think there's only two options that you can go with here, and it's obvious. I think you have to go with Allegiant Stadium or T-Mobile because as much as MGM is nostalgic, we're talking about one of the biggest boxing matches of the year, and who wants to see that fight at MGM of all places?
Nobody. I mean, Zan, if you're talking about Tank and Garcia in the ways that we want to promote these two and we want to see these two at their weight classes, it has to be at minimum T-Mobile Arena. And hopefully you have the Allegiant Stadium, but if you think ticket sales are going to be a concern, then you can go to T-Mobile Arena. Like I said, as much, Zan, as we talk about the nostalgia feeling of the MGM Grand, it's kind of, I hate to use the word, but it's passe. It's more like it's 3 or 4 on the depth chart of Las Vegas venues.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, if you were to ask me this question 5 years ago, it would have been a no-brainer. But now with all the new advancements in technology and all that stuff and expanding the stadiums, MGM Grand has just become more of a name in a casino than a fight venue, the way it used to be. Now, would it be cool when people flock to the MGM? Absolutely. The MGM would be the most packed it's been in probably a long time. But Tank versus Garcia, two guys from, I guess you could argue, more so my generation than yours. You're slightly older than me. I think if you have those two guys, in the generation that they're in, it's got to be at a bigger venue than just MGM. So I think if you're going to do it in Vegas, those are the two options. Which, by the way, I think Allegiant Stadium is more than deserving to host that fight.
I think so. I think Zan, it's a no-brainer. If you're a boxing promoter, if you're these two fighters, you're going to want that in Allegiant Stadium. And you're going to hope for some big business in Allegiant Stadium. People in Las Vegas flocking for that fight.
And a massive undercard, too. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's no big UFC that weekend. At least there's a fight night scheduled. So therefore, if you want to double dip and go to the fight night, whether it's going to be at the Apex or somewhere else, in Vegas or at Virgin Hotels, you could easily see people doing a double dip if UFC fight night is at the Apex that weekend, which I don't think they don't have a location for that. Right, that's the one.
Can you give me the date again?
It's April 15th. It's the same night as Holloway versus Arnold Allen.
Oh, the Holloway Arnold Allen card. I don't think we have a location officially for the UFC that night.
Okay. I was just gonna say, hey, because if Tank and Garcia is number one in town, that works out perfectly.
I mean, but then also, and no offense, but I thought we said 2023 we were going to try to get out of the Apex.
Yeah,
Dana White and a Dana White, I guess.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not working out too well, is it?
And as far as those reports go about Fury and Usyk, I want to say yes, but Zan, I'm going to play a sound effect that we commonly play on Empty the Bench.
RELAX.
I'll believe it when it gets officially announced.
Okay, well, the final question that I have for you regarding Fury and Usyk is, Tom, we're currently sitting. This is gonna air. Obviously, this is gonna air Thursday morning, of course. But I have to ask you: do you think that this Fury Usyk fight, happens at any point this year, or have you lost all faith that this is not going to happen between Frank Warren and Bob Arum?
Zan, I'll answer that with this. I will believe it. When that fight announcement becomes official, when I get one tweeted out by all the different boxing media, by the fighters themselves. That is when I will believe a Fury Usyk fight becomes official.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and it's the same issue we have with boxing every single year. So far, nothing has changed.
Plus, we've got the Ngannou wild card, which actually, Zan, one last question for this episode regarding Bellator. Buy or sell? Prop bet, yes or no? Francis Ngannou makes an appearance at Bellator
this weekend. I'm gonna say buy it.
Yeah, you think it's gonna happen?
Yeah, I do.
I think maybe to just tease us a little bit, I could see somewhat of a Francis Ngannou appearance or a mention on commentary or something as a little tease.
With all of the legends that are supposed to be there, I'm not sure if you've seen the lineup, but Chuck Liddell, Frank Shamrock, Mark Coleman. There's no way that Francis doesn't get a little tease with all of those guys in attendance.
I will be kind of sad if Fedor gets knocked out and then we have the retirement ceremony afterward.
Or how about this outlier? What if this weekend is not Fedor's retirement fight and Fedor wins and Francis Ngannou's first fight in Bellator is against Fedor Emelianenko?
What we get some sort of WWE style angle with all the other fighters, retired fighters, and cage and Fedor gets the belt placed on him. He says, "I'm not yet retiring yet, all of y'all." And then Francis Ngannou makes a big entrance. That would be so dumb.
Could you, could you imagine?
That would be amazing. That would honestly be something else.
Yeah, that means that Dana White would probably want to break his TV.
He would probably have an aneurysm.
More than likely.
He would probably, Zan, he would probably go over to a punching bag that has on it, Zan, a photo of Steve Mazzagati's face, and he would just start to rip into it.
Oh, well, I don't even know if he owns one, but if he does, I would not be surprised at all. Because, of course, for those of you who don't know, that is his least favorite referee, who has been quoted as saying that he was not that bad. But we digress. But before we get out of here, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure to follow Empty the Bench Network on YouTube. Make sure to follow all of us across social media at MMA Outsiders ETB. You can find my work over at bjpen.com. My ad is Bando99 everywhere, all across social media. You can find Tom's work over at Fansided MMA. You can find his stuff over at Thomas J. Albano and Tom Talk Sports 9 on Twitter. And then of course we would not be remiss to say that yes, this Bellator card does feel like the biggest Bellator card in the history of the promotion. And just as a reminder, this Bellator card is not on Showtime. This Bellator card is on CBS. The prelims will air just before that on Fubo and then the Bellator MMA YouTube channel. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully this is the first of many CBS Bellator collaborations. And just as a reminder, once again, the UFC event this weekend is staying on its original Asian time zone schedule. So it is a later start. So if you are one of the sickos that wants to stay up, make sure you set your alarm properly. Also, that event is wall to wall on ESPN Plus for those of you guys who forgot. And then, of course, next weekend is Super Bowl weekend, which, of course, the big story that we're going to be talking about on the next episode of the MMA Outsiders is, of course, previewing UFC 284, headlined by the 2 championship fights. And then, of course, at the top of the bill, we'll have Islam Makhachev taking on Alexander Volkanovski in Perth. So there we go.
Plus, Zan, we've got, when we do our episode next week, Zan, we go from a big Bellator to a big UFC 284. We got to talk about that Volkanovski Islam Makhachev fight that'll be coming up that I'm super hyped for.
That's true. Oh, I think you, me, and many others are very excited for that true super fight. And it's literally number 1 versus number 2 pound for pound. It doesn't get any better than that. It should be a tremendous preview, and it should end up being a tremendous fight because people have been counting down the days ever since that fight was announced. And now we're finally here. We're almost a week out.
Mm-hmm. But first, enjoy the Bellator this weekend. You maniacs who want to stay up for the UFC, you enjoy that as well. For Zan, I'm Tom. We'll see you next week on the MMA Outsiders. Take care, everybody.
Take care. And before we get out of here, we just want to leave you with one thing. And always remember, be Joe Piper.
Yeah. Be Joe Piper. We'll see you, everyone.
See everyone.